Hello, my name is Frank DeLuzio, and welcome to Frank's Fiction, the book review podcast. This is part 3 of the mini series. So, we have today's episode, and then next week we're going to be talking about The Soulmate by Sally Hepworth. And that's going to be a discussion with my friend Chelsea. Really excited to show all of you that episode. And then after that, it's going to be a little bit of a hiatus. I'm working on creating more content, coming up with new ideas to maybe add in addition to the book reviews. I also have to read more books. I have to read books to make episodes. It goes hand in hand there. If any of you have any specific book recommendations that you want me to cover on the show, definitely private message me. You could email me if you want at franksfiction@yahoo.com, or just private message me on Instagram or TikTok, preferably Instagram. I tend to see those messages a little bit easier. If you're not following me already on Instagram and TikTok, make sure you're doing that at franks_fiction. Little bit of a life update. First of all, it's the day after Halloween. Happy Halloween to everyone who celebrates it. I hope all of you had a good time. I had more of a low-key holiday this year, but I'm perfectly fine with that. I love being able to spend time with my boyfriend, which, speaking of, this past weekend, we went on a picnic. We've been wanting to. So let me start over a little bit. We found this beautiful picnic basket. It's like part picnic basket on the top, and then the bottom is more like a canvas bag. But I sort of prefer that because it's a little bit harder for ants or any sort of bugs to get into the basket itself. It has these cute little plates and wine glasses and silverware in it. There's like blue in the design, which blue is my favorite color. So that works for me. What also is my favorite is when things are 50% off. And it was more of a summer item. We went to this cute little place a couple towns over, and yeah, there was a 50% summer clearance sale on it. That was awesome to get. And we've been wanting to do a picnic for a while, and we finally found a great day this past weekend in October, which is really tough because October is the beginning of it getting really, really cold, at least in New England over here. So yeah, we went on a picnic. We got some cute pictures. We went on a little bit of a walk. I had a lovely little tick that was hugging my leg, and I killed that, or I heated it somewhere. So that's gone. I hate ticks. If you don't know me personally, I hate ticks. I hate mosquitoes, and I hate that they exist. But here we are. I can't control whether they're here or not. But long story short, we had a great picnic. We had a great time. I think that's all for updates. I want to get right to the episode then. Without further ado, let's get to the episode. Enjoy. All right, everyone. So I don't know if this is going to be a long episode or if I'm just really organized, because I ended up taking 4 pages of notes, which I normally never do. I really dissected the details in this book. It might even be a little bit of a retelling. So if you didn't end up reading this book, that is definitely going to be covered in the spoiler-filled section of the episode. But right now, we're sticking pretty light, pretty clean. You got your raunchy, dirty side later on. No, I'm just kidding. I don't know how dirty it's going to get, but there are a lot of secrets that are going to be revealed. So stay tuned for that if you're listening to that second part of the episode. And if you've read this book like myself, it's going to be very exciting talking about this stuff and kind of sharing some of our opinions on that. So today's book is The Drowning Woman by Robyn Harding, which, by the way, love you, Robyn. You're one of my favorite authors. Yes. This is my third book that I've read by her. I've also read her novel, The Party, and The Perfect Family, and those were great books. I will get to my thoughts on this book later on and what my star rating would be. That will be at the end of the episode. But these episodes would not be anything without my dramatic retellings of what the story is about. So here we go. Lee Gulliver never thought she'd find herself living on the streets. No one ever does. But when her restaurant fails and she falls deeper into debt, she leaves her old life behind with nothing but her clothes and her Toyota Corolla. In Seattle, she parks in a secluded spot by the beach to lay low and plan her next move, until early one morning, she sees a sobbing woman throw herself into the ocean. Lee hauls the woman back to the surface, but instead of appreciation, she's met with fury. The drowning woman, Hazel, tells her that she wanted to die, that she's trapped in a toxic, abusive marriage, that she's a prisoner in her own home. Lee has throttled her one chance to escape her life. Out of options, Hazel retreats to her gilded cage, and Lee thinks she's seen the last of her until her unexpected return the next morning. Bonded by desperate but difficult circumstances, the women strike up a close and unlikely friendship. And then one day, Hazel makes a shocking request. She wants Lee to help her disappear. It'll be easy, Hazel assures her. But Lee soon learns that nothing is as it seems, and that Hazel may not be the friend Lee thought she was. Don't mind all the pauses with that. I hope that was dramatic for you. I hope I did a great job for all of you out there. And I hope all of you are doing well. I don't know if I ever really say that in episodes, but I just, I hope everyone's doing well. So, a little bit that I could get into before we start getting into those spoilers is that Lee used to be the owner of a restaurant, but then unfortunately, like a lot of businesses, COVID ends up affecting their business. She ends up having to need to borrow some money, and just overall, the restaurant ends up closing down and she ends up being homeless. As she's navigating through being homeless and having to live in her car, she does come across a woman named Hazel, and Hazel is out in the ocean. Now, before I get into any more of this story, and you probably already heard it from the blurb a little bit, and I meant to say this sooner, so I'm sorry about that. I want to leave a big trigger warning that there are mentions of self-harm or taking one's own life. So if those are triggers for you, I highly recommend that you don't listen to this episode. So now that that's out of the way, this story, it switches back and forth between Lee. So it starts with Lee's point of view, then it goes to Hazel's point of view, goes to Lee's point of view, and then it ends at Hazel's point of view. And each point of view has quite a plethora of chapters in each one. One thing I really thought that was fascinating about this book is that in each section, so for example, Lee has the first section, and then when we go to Hazel in the next section and afterwards, it feels like each section is almost telling its own story, and it's all umbrellaed under one big story, which is this novel. For some reason, that's something that I really ended up enjoying about it, because I felt like I was getting all these little sub stories within the big umbrella story. And I thought that Harding did a really good job at organizing that and telling the story. There were quite a few amount of twists in the story, which definitely caught me off guard. At times, I would think that something was happening. There was a lot of times I guessed the wrong thing that was happening, and then it ended up being something very different. And that's something we can touch on more later on, because there were quite a few twists. And I think Robyn did a good job at those. And I think this story could have been told in a lot of different ways, which I think also makes for a good story. I'm kind of at the point where it's really hard to not give away any more of the story. So if you haven't read the book yet and you want to, I would pause here and then read the book and then come back to this episode. If you don't care about reading the book and you just want to listen to the rest of this episode, then yeah, let's do it, And if you've read the book already, then you're good to go and we can listen to this next part. So for everyone that just needs that little bit of a break, we're going to take a really, 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 really quick break, and then we will be back with the spoiler filled part. Talk to you soon. Today's episode is sponsored by Zencastr. So, a few years ago, I started a podcast, and one of my podcasting friends told me they record through Zencastr. I guest starred on his show. It was super easy to join through the invite link. I just plugged in my microphone and we recorded. When I listened to the episode, the sound quality was chef's kiss. I knew going forward I had to use Zencastr to record episodes for my own show. It's now super easy to record a podcast with Zencastr. Log in using your browser and start recording a high quality podcast right away. Record studio quality sound and up to 4K video with your guests. Feel a sense of zen knowing Zencastr's multi-layered backups ensure you always have your recordings in the highest quality, even if the connection is unstable. If you have thought about podcasting before and realized that you need a lot of different tools and services, those days are over. With Zencastr's all-in-one podcasting platform, you can create your podcast all in one place and distribute to Spotify, Apple, and other major destinations. Go to zencastr.com/pricing and use my code FranksFiction, and you'll get 30% off your first month of any Zencastr paid plan. I want you to have the same easy experiences I do for all of my podcasting and content needs. It's time to share your story. And we're back. So we have a lot to talk about with this book. So let's get into it. So at the very beginning of the book, Lee, who I mentioned before, she's one of the main characters. She gets robbed while sleeping in her car. And essentially, what gets stolen is her purse with a lot of important information. Now, I remember one of my first questions reading this, and I noticed a lot of other readers were asking the same question. But Lee, why would you leave your purse right on the passenger seat, right in the front passenger seat? Why would you ever do that? Like, we have glove compartments, we have that middle section. I mean, shit, hide it under your seat or something. I felt like there were so many opportunities to hide something so important, and you just so happen to put it right on the passenger seat. I don't know if she had like a super privileged life before or what, or just maybe was never robbed before. But coming from someone like me who did not live in the best neighborhoods, you hide that shit. I'm not trying to rob shame Lee or anything, but you want to keep your stuff protected for sure. So in the spoiler free part, I mentioned that she was a restaurant owner and the restaurant had to shut down. Well, she had borrowed some money from it was either an ex-boyfriend or a loan shark, or I think it was both. His name's Damon, which isn't really important. Now, did anyone think Damon was going to come back and find Lee? Because I totally thought that was going to happen. Spoiler alert, that never ends up happening. I was really surprised. The way that she described this man was a really dangerous man, and it just so happened that he never found her. But she was on, I think she was living on the East Coast, and this story is taking place all the way in Washington, which is on the West Coast. Maybe that's why he never came across her, but I don't know. I feel like people who are looking for someone that owes them a lot of money, I don't know. I feel like they would go for it. I don't know if he would just give up like that. I don't know how realistic that is, but who knows? Maybe it just wasn't worth chasing him. Now, I do want to mention a little bit of a side plot going on that relates to this whole restaurant thing because Lee has a sister named Teresa. She's not in this book too much, but they have a strained relationship, and this whole restaurant closing down plays a big part in that. So I'm going to give it a little goss for you guys. So, what ended up happening between them was that Lee needed this money. Her sister, Teresa, was engaged to a man named Clark. And then Clark went into Lee's restaurant one day with another woman and caught them kissing. And essentially, Clark was cheating on Lee's sister. Now, this is up for debate on how wrong this is. They don't tell us at the beginning, it takes a while. I'm just kind of skipping ahead to their issues because we're not going to be touching on these issues much throughout this review and throughout me talking. But why they're strained was instead of Lee telling her sister about this affair, she blackmailed Clark so that she could get the money for her restaurant. And instead of Clark going along with it and helping Lee out with the money, he just ended up telling Teresa. So Lee's sister, Teresa, is like, what the hell? Like, why wouldn't you tell me that? And I guess towards the book, that's not a sentence. Towards the end of the book, Teresa ends up saying Clark has like sex issues or something. They don't really delve too much into that, and Lee does not believe it whatsoever. She's like, okay. But essentially that's kind of the beef between them. It's more of a side plot, it's not the main thing that happens, but I just wanted to touch on that because Lee didn't end up getting that money, this is why she's in the position that she's currently in. I guess if it was me, regardless of me needing the money, I probably wouldn't have made that choice. I probably would have just told my sister, but this is where we are. Lee didn't end up telling her sister. It's a regret that she has, and she doesn't like that they're strained, but this is the position that they're in now. So I thought that Harding did a great job at making the reader feel the stress and the tenseness behind being homeless. There's a couple scenes where, for example, Lee's trying to take a shower at a gym or like a YMCA type of place, and these women are feeling uncomfortable. And I feel like you yourself can just feel like the struggle and the desperation of just trying to do an everyday thing. And I ended up messaging Robyn Harding about I really appreciated her descriptions with everything and that it definitely made me not take as much for granted, like taking a shower. That's something that is actually a privilege for some of us, and some other people do not have that everyday privilege. Same thing when it comes to getting 3 meals a day, like, that is a privilege, and sometimes we take that for granted, and Robyn actually messaged me back, so I love her, and she ended up telling me that she interviewed homeless advocates to get some research for the book, and I thought that was really cool. So Lee ends up getting a job as a waitress. I'm going to kind of skip through. I'm not going to talk about every single detail in the book, but I'm just going to recognize some of the main things that end up being important throughout. So Lee gets this job as a waitress. It's at some place that's a little sketchy, but I mean, she has to kind of take what she gets. She ends up getting a phone eventually because that ends up playing a big role later on. And what's really important is one day she ends up meeting this man named Jesse, and Jesse ends up being a main character in this book. I remember when Lee had met Jesse, I was happy for her. I was like, "Oh, like Jesse doesn't know that Lee is homeless." But I was really hoping, something good for her because of all the struggles that she's gone through. Now, I didn't know yet what Lee had gone through with her sister exactly, or none of us readers did at this point. But, I was rooting for her. She's our protagonist. And even though Jesse didn't know Lee's living situation, he just ends up meeting this waitress at a bar that he seems interested in. I was hopeful for Lee. I was happy for her. I wanted her to find romance. I want my girl to be able to get up on her feet again and live somewhat of a normal life. So now we're skipping ahead to when Lee is parked near some beach in her car because she's living in her car. And this is where she hears Hazel crying. And Hazel ends up just walking into the ocean and she's essentially trying to take her own life. And Lee could have just let that happen, but she doesn't. We wouldn't have a story. I mean, it's literally the title of the book. We would not have any of this if Lee didn't go to the ocean and save Hazel from drowning. I want to say, I'm assuming that's like the inciting incident in the book. Now, a little backstory on Hazel, and we don't get all this information right at the beginning, but just to give a little bit so that you know who Hazel is. Hazel also grew up kind of on the poor side, but she ended up marrying Benjamin, which we're going to dig into that marriage throughout this. But she ended up marrying Benjamin. Benjamin, like it said in the blurb, he's abusive, he's controlling, he seems manipulative, he's wealthy. So that's what ends up kind of helping Hazel out. But the only reason that those two are married was Benjamin wanted Hazel to sign a total power exchange. Now, for people who aren't familiar what a total power exchange is, that is a BDSM dynamic where a dominant partner is given a lot of control over a submissive partner. There's a part in the book that talks about how Hazel kind of liked the whole dominant submissive aspect that they had going between them, but that Benjamin wanted more control from that, which how do I go about this? For me, that's a red flag. It might not be for everyone. And it even says it in the book that some people really enjoy this aspect. I know for me personally, I've been in relationships that were really controlling. So that would definitely be a trigger for me if someone wanted a lot of control over my autonomy. But it does work for some people, and some people are really into it or they get turned on by it. But the way that this was framed, Benjamin just does not sound like a good guy. It sounds like the wrong type of person to be in this dominant position. But I also have to acknowledge, too, that Benjamin is a criminal defense lawyer. So he has a good job. He makes good money. He already kind of has a lot of control and power. So this just adds on to it. But Hazel does express that she feels like she's living in a prison and that being homeless is potentially less worse than Hazel being in her current marriage. So Hazel and Lee start to develop some sort of relationship, some sort of friendship. Hazel ends up giving Lee food and money here and there a few times. And I liked where this was going. I liked that they were bonding, especially coming, like being in two different power positions. Hazel is in like this wealthy lifestyle and Lee is in this more low class, lower lifestyle. And one thing that I recognized, and I don't know if this was the point, but it kind of started feeling like Lee was getting a sister again, if that makes any sense, because she couldn't talk to Teresa anymore. So I felt like Hazel was kind of almost stepping in as like this backup. And once again, I was sort of feeling happy for Lee because she has this guy that seemed a little interested in her. And now she's like potentially getting this friend too. I was thinking that's really cool. So because Lee had rescued Hazel from the ocean, Hazel was able to dry off, of course, but Lee in her living situation, she's not. She ends up getting sick. Now, I know from personal experience when you really need to make money, but you get sick, that sucks because you really need money for your bills, especially if you're living week to week. So Lee is freaking out about this because she needs to work, because if she doesn't work, she's not getting money to survive. But Jesse comes to the rescue. I think he ends up making her some soup or something, but he ends up bringing her to his place, or they end up meeting at his place, and she ends up passing out there. And but he doesn't do, he's not taking advantage of her or anything like that. And this is a part of the story where we learn that Jesse is a personal trainer. That's going to come in handy later on. So one thing that pointed out, or one thing that I thought was a little peculiar as I was reading, was because Lee has a phone. So Lee was thinking, oh, like, well, something that two people that are interested in each other would do is exchange numbers, right? So when she asks Jesse about that, Jesse says, I know where to find you. I don't know if that was a red flag for people. That was kind of a red flag for me, or at least that was red flag number one, because I'm like, I I'm like, are you with someone? Like, I remember thinking that because there's a scene too where Lee's in the bathroom, and I don't know if this is, I don't want to sound stereotypical or anything, but she ends up talking about seeing this like expensive skincare product or something in Jesse's bathroom. And I don't want to be that guy, but I feel like a straight man typically doesn't have that type of product. And I'm just making jokes here, but like, I do straight men clean themselves? Like, I swear there's some that brag about never washing their ass, and I think that's completely disgusting. So that's why when I hear that this guy has like a skincare routine, I'm like, I don't know. I mean, he is a personal trainer, so he does take care of himself health wise. So maybe it's possible. The way that was described, though, I'm like, I don't know if there's another woman or something. And he has like this nice car, but then the apartment is very just blah, like not really furnished or anything. I don't know. It sounded a little weird. I've also read a lot of thrillers. I've seen quite a few true crime and stuff. So I don't know. That was just something that sort of pointed out to me and I was a little sus about. So I just realized in my notes, I wrote Lee talks to Hazel about Lee. That is not correct. Lee talks to Hazel about Jesse, because like I said, they're kind of having this friendship, like I said, a little bit of like a sister type of relationship. And Lee even mentions that, oh, like when I meet a new guy, like I would talk to Teresa about it. So I think she's trying to have Hazel as that type of relationship and not really thinking about the dynamics between them. But Hazel says a very interesting quote, which is, sometimes people aren't who they say they are. I should know. Lee at the time kind of just thinks, which I thought the same thing, that, Hazel is miserable in this relationship. So she's probably talking about Benjamin. Spoiler alert, not exactly, but I was so distracted by that. Like some of the ways that Hazel was acting in this book, I just assumed she was so damaged from her current relationship with Benjamin, because girl, like, I know what that's like. I know what it's like to be in a really controlling, not to this extent, but just to be in a controlling relationship, and it takes all of the energy and just all of the life out of you. But this is a big part in the story where Hazel asks Lee for help, and she talks about how she can get them fake IDs because she wants to essentially escape Benjamin. I'm going to skip ahead to a scene that was really hard for me to read. I did not like this scene at all, but we need some conflict. Lee ends up running into Hazel one day, but Hazel is with some of her quote friends. And these are essentially people that Benjamin had approved for Hazel to be friends with. They're the wives of his coworkers. But the way that Hazel acts, bitch. Hazel treats Lee like just like a homeless person that she doesn't really know well. And my heart was breaking for Lee in this moment because it just felt very high school, where it's like you almost have this secret friendship and then you try to like confront them in the hallways at school or something, but they're one of the popular girls and you're not. And they're like, oh, hi, who are you? And it just, yeah. And Hazel, she ends up offering money and food or whatever, but like just in this weird way of like, I don't really know you, but like, oh, I'll help the poor woman who just needs a lot of help. So after all that happens, Lee goes to Jesse and she's obviously upset about that. Well, Lee and Jesse end up having sex. And I'm only mentioning that because that ends up being an important plot point. I know I kind of just threw that in there, but trust me, it's important. So a few days later, I guess Hazel had been trying to, they end up meeting in this spot where essentially Lee was when she saved Hazel. It's like this little, like, it sounded nice, honestly. It kind of sounded like this little private beach area that no one really goes to, which of course is a little convenient. But I guess Hazel had been going there. Lee hadn't been staying there because Lee had been staying at Jesse's house. Ooh, she's got a boyfriend, maybe. I mean, it's not official or anything, but they're acting that way. They're doing things. They're seeing each other. He seems interested. But Hazel tries to win Lee back and apologizes for her. She was really sorry about acting that way. And she offers Hazel a spa day and she'll pay for it. And Hazel can get a haircut and I think her nails done. I think it mostly was like her hair and stuff and just like the whole like massage and just a whole nice treatment. And Lee doesn't really, she was like trying to be polite about it, but she obviously doesn't want to turn that down. I mean, who would turn down a free spa day? Not me. But because of Lee's relationship with Jesse, she asks Hazel if she can add in a Brazilian wax because, they're having sex. And Hazel's kind of questioning because Hazel thought that they were just more so friends. But Lee is essentially saying, oh no, like we're more now, we're getting intimate. Or at least she hints at it. I don't know if she says that exactly, but the whole Brazilian waxing was a big hint that we're fucking. So when Lee goes to the spa, now this also seems like a fucked up moment. I felt the tension here. I felt the tension because Lee's at the spa and she's doing all the treatments. And then the guy, I mean, I had goosebumps on my arm when the guy's like, oh, this total is like 500 something dollars. And Lee's like, oh my God, like this bitch Hazel did not pay for me. Like, why isn't there payment down? Like, she's supposed to be paying for me. And the guy's like, no, there's no charge or anything. So Lee's calling her and it's going to voicemail. I was panicking. I thought Lee was going to run out. I thought she was going to get arrested. I was freaking out. I'm like, oh my God, like this is a horrible position to be in when you can't afford something and you're like, what do I do? Like the person I'm trying to call that said they take care of this, they're not picking up their phone. But weirdly enough, Hazel does end up walking in and she ends up paying for it and she apologizes. So I was like, oh, okay, we can maybe breathe for a second. And then after all this happened, Hazel ends up telling Lee what her master plan is when it comes to this whole thing with Benjamin about escaping him, and that she asks if Lee can impersonate her. Or so this is supposed to be the plan that, well, at least the plan that Hazel tells Lee that, Lee, if you can impersonate me because we look so alike, because when Lee went to the spa, she ended up getting like a very similar haircut as Hazel, which I really didn't read into that too much at the time. But essentially, like they look more and more alike now after this whole spa treatment. And Hazel asks Lee if you can impersonate as me so I can get a head start to the airport. You just go in the house because Benjamin, his controlling ass, I forgot to mention earlier, he has like all these cameras. He's always like trying to keep tabs on Hazel essentially. And there's not many times where Hazel can leave the house. She usually can go to the gym for an hour or two and she goes on a run sometimes. And usually when Hazel goes on the run, it's to like go hang out with Lee at this point. But then besides that, she doesn't really, she's not working or anything. She doesn't really leave the house and she's supposed to be tending to Benjamin. So the plan is for Lee to go in. Hazel gets this head start and then Lee ends up like changing clothes and going into her car and escaping. Like essentially, all right. Also, Hazel, I guess, was leaving Lee a bunch of money in an envelope or something and the ID. That's what she ends up telling her so that then Lee can escape afterwards. And then they both go live these lives in Panama. But I remember when Hazel was talking about this is also when I had like this weird gut feeling and I was like, that's a red flag. I don't know. This definitely doesn't sound good. It kind of sounds dangerous. And I want to say she ends up talking to Jesse about it too. And Jesse is even like, oh my God, that sounds dangerous. But Lee's like, this is my friend and I want to help her out. So Lee does agree to it, which I don't know if I would have. I didn't actually really think about that if I would have or not if one of my new friends was in this situation. It just seems like they haven't known each other that long enough. Even if I had a best friend of years, just the way that she described Benjamin, he sounded like a very violent man. So that would have been a tough ask for me. But then at the same time, she's saying, well, there's this money in this envelope and you get to escape too. And I think it was like $50,000. So that's a tough one. I mean, it's enticing for sure. But Lee agrees to it. She starts going through this plan. Like she walks in the house, she's in Hazel's clothes, and Hazel was in Lee's clothes. And Lee comes in the house, and this is where like the oh shit moment before we go to Hazel's point of view. Lee comes in, and there's someone sitting in a chair. I forgot to mention too earlier on that I remember with some of the tellings, I thought one of the twists was going to be that Benjamin and Jesse were the same guy, and I would have shit myself because I would have been like, oh my God, like, oh my God, like they're both with the same guy and he's like impersonating Jesse or something, because Hazel and Jesse hadn't, like Lee had been talking to these two, but these two hadn't like been talking to each other. So I didn't know if like the separation was due to that. I will say that they're not the same person, but what shocked the hell out of me, Lee comes in the house, Jesse is murdered. He's like been stabbed a bunch of times. So here's my theory, because when the whole Brazilian wax thing was hinted at, I was starting to think, I was like, after when I realized they weren't the same person, then I was starting to think like just some of the little reactions that Hazel was having. Then I was starting to think, oh my God, what if Hazel and Jesse have some sort of relationship? And then Jesse and Lee having sex, like, what if that really pissed Hazel off and she killed him? Now, that's not what happened, but man, like, I really thought that was it, because I'm like, this bitch is really smart then. If she, like, killed him, framed Lee or something, she goes to this other country. Oh my God, that would have been a boss move. That's not what happens. But now we're going to Hazel's point of view. Now, I was not expecting Hazel's point of view to start this way. I thought it was just gonna go from when she's like escaping or something, and like her point of view. I feel like stories tend to do that where it just goes to the next event. No, 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 honey. This all goes from the point of view from all the past events that we just read. We're almost going through them again, but through Hazel's eyes. And oh my God, this shook me to my core. I didn't even know what to think about Hazel when I was starting to read this, because I'm like, it really shocked me. But before getting into all those events, I also forgot to mention, or at least we didn't know this until now when we get to Hazel's section, but Hazel has a mom who has Alzheimer's, and this is the reason that she ended up marrying Benjamin, because the treatments are really expensive, and obviously Benjamin has a lot of money. And Hazel and Benjamin came up with this agreement of the total power exchange if Benjamin will cover the cost for her mother's treatment. The issue, though, was that Benjamin ended up becoming extremely controlling and demeaning of Hazel as things went on with the relationship. There even came to a point where this was so messed up, was there's a scene where Benjamin's like, yeah, I scheduled an appointment for you to have a boob job. And she had to agree to it because of their whole exchange. And she's like crying during this. I did feel a little bit bad. I did, and I did, and I didn't. I mean, I felt bad for her, but then when I was starting to see other events that Hazel goes through, it was tough to have sympathy. It was one of those things where I'm like, hurt people, I guess. But she ends up having to get this boob job against her will. And oh my God, that was so messed up. That hurt reading as well. Benjamin does allow Hazel to go to the gym. And when Hazel goes to the gym, well, she meets this personal trainer named Jesse. So I'm like, oh, I knew it. I knew it. So they end up meeting here, meaning they end up knowing each other. So when Lee was talking to Hazel and Jesse, like they already knew each other, because Lee would talk about, oh, my friend in this abusive marriage, and then talking to Hazel about this new guy and stuff, and his name's Jesse. Like they both knew, and they both lied to Lee, and it's wrong. It felt wrong, but I didn't even know how wrong to the extent. But Hazel ends up opening up to Jesse over time in their training sessions, and they end up having an affair. And as this affair, so this was a little weird too. There was a couple weird things when it came to their relationship. It didn't sound like when Lee was having a relationship with Jesse, there was these moments where it kind of sounded romantic or it sounded like Jesse was a sweet guy. And this is why it wasn't really catching on to potentially who Jesse was as a person. But then when you're seeing Jesse from Hazel's point of view, he seems like a little extreme or like almost like a little bit of a jerk and really just jumps to certain plans very quickly. Like they don't know each other, or at least like from this point of view of Hazel's, like her and Jesse don't really know each other super long, but they go into this affair and Hazel's developing feelings for Jesse. Oh man, what men do to us, right? And Jesse kind of like goes right into that plan with Hazel about, oh my God, like for you to get out of this marriage with Benjamin, like we should go through this plan where you take your own life, but you don't actually do it. And then we escape together. And I'm like, oh Lord, I never want to be talking to a guy. And even if I was in a relationship, well, first of all, me being in a relationship, I wouldn't even be entertaining a guy like this, even if it was a relationship that I wasn't happy in. I don't think I mean, who knows? I'm not in that position though. I'm in a happy relationship. So I don't have to worry so much about that. I don't think I'd ever be in this type of relationship dynamic personally, but I just feel like even I guess even as a single person, you're talking to someone who goes to like such an extreme plan like this, that's a red flag. I feel like that's someone that I'm like, huh, they kind of this potentially nice guy, he jumped to that like weird plan very quickly. So what was also a red flag for me was that as Hazel's in the ocean, I guess she was supposed to be in the ocean for like 5 to 7 minutes, and then Jesse was supposed to come with a boat to grab her, and then they went off or whatever. And Benjamin was supposed to assume that Hazel took her own life. I think she left a note or something. Well, Jesse's late picking her up. So thank God Lee grabbed her, because if she didn't, Hazel could have died out there. But at the same time, like it said in the blurb, when Hazel was all aggravated that Lee had saved her, she was aggravated because it foiled this whole plan. And then when Hazel and Jesse reconvene, Jesse's like, what the hell happened? And Hazel's like, well, what the hell happened with you? You were late to getting me. And that's when Jesse explains about like getting his friend's bow. He was late with it. And he's like, oh, this homeless woman ruined our plan. So when that was said, and kind of the way that he was actually demeaning Lee behind her back, and it made me realize Jesse knew that Lee was homeless the whole time. And I felt so bad. Like the way he was describing Lee, I'm like, you're a piece of shit for this. Like, I don't like you. I don't like you. I don't support you with Lee. I don't support you with Hazel. Like, you sound gross. Some men are just so gross like that. But I just felt bad for Lee because Lee was trying so hard. She hasn't been homeless for super long, and she's like trying to live sort of a similar life that she used to live when it came to like meeting this new friend and this new guy, and trying not to like be ashamed of her living situation. And she didn't really want Jesse to find out. And then Jesse like knew the whole time. And that just, I don't know, that doesn't sit well with me. Hazel does express some feelings that her friendship with Lee could be something real, and it's very unlike her other kind of like fake friendships that she's forced to have. She's feeling like this connection, they actually talk about real things in life and they're actually getting to know each other, and it's not like all these formalities and bullshit. So we cut to Benjamin had asked Hazel to do some things. There was like one thing on the list. Hazel had done all the other things but one thing. And because she didn't do that one thing, Benjamin's like, bitch, you're going in the basement. And the basement, there's like this whole isolated area where it's literally like just this uncomfortable blanket or something, or she has to, it's like her timeout area. So she's forced to go there. And oh my God, no, like we need to get the hell away from this asshole. Which, speaking of, Hazel goes to Jesse the next day and she's like, I need to get away from this asshole. Like, I need to escape. And this whole like pretending like I was dead or something, he's not even going to believe it anyway, because he's not going to see a body in the ocean like that. Like, this asshole is going to be looking hard for proof that I'm actually dead. So I just need to escape a different way. And this is where Jesse comes up with the plan of murdering Benjamin. But what's even more messed up is Jesse goes, we can murder Benjamin and frame the homeless woman, meaning Lee. Now, if I was romantically into someone, that would be a mega red flag. If they're mentioning killing my husband for us to run away together, I don't know. That just doesn't personally, it doesn't sound like the most sane man. But I definitely was feeling like that Jesse's complete garbage and he's leading Lee on. At this point, that's what we're starting to see. And obviously I didn't like that, but I was really feeling bad that because then when we read this part in the book, then I start thinking, oh my God, they're setting Lee up for murder. There's a part I didn't mention. It's not super, super important, but Hazel had given Lee a statue from Benjamin's house and told her, oh, you could sell this to get some money. And then I realized that was maybe a way to set Lee up, like having one of the items. Essentially, the plan between Jesse and Hazel that mostly Jesse comes up with, but Hazel's going along with it. And I fucking hate that. But anyway, I digress. Jesse saying, like, we have to make Lee look like this crazy, obsessed homeless woman so that this whole crime seems believable and that she's like stalking you. So that's where like the statue came into play. And also that's where, which I'm just skipping ahead a little bit, but the reason why Hazel wasn't picking up the phone, now we get from Hazel's point of view, it's to make it look like that Lee's calling her a bunch of times unwanted, that like she got her number or whatever. And I also realized this is why Jesse never gave Lee his number because he wasn't actually into her. Like it's all starting to make sense. But yeah, I didn't like that Hazel went along with like letting Lee call her, not picking up to like fit to that narrative. And Hazel did feel awful. She talks about she felt awful when she treated Lee the way that she did around her friends, but she was also on board for setting Lee up because then after Lee leaves, she's kind of talking it up to her friend. Like her friends are creeped out because, oh, it's a homeless person. We're rich and we don't deal with homeless people. Hazel kind of plays into the narrative of like, yeah, that was scary and I don't know, she might be obsessed with me or something. So it was hard for me to have sympathy for Hazel in some of these moments because I'm like, bitch, you're going along with this plan. I don't like that. Jesse is the one that tells Hazel that you should give her your phone number. And that's what plays into the whole like letting her call you, not picking it up so that she looks like your stalker. But as Hazel and Lee are talking about the relationship with Jesse and how Hazel's starting to think, this, Lee's talking about this in like a more romantic way. Like I need to question Jesse about this because I'm into Jesse romantically and he's telling me that no, we're not kissing, we're definitely not having sex, like I'm just using her. She does confront Jesse about his relationship with Lee and he does reiterate that this isn't real, I've never done any of that stuff, ew, it's so gross, and that Jesse is dead set on this plan and wants to be with her. But Hazel is starting to feel bad and she's starting, I think, to listen to her intuition a little bit. I'm like, this just feels off. Like, I don't, because she's thinking probably like, why would Lee lie to me? Lee does feel like a real friend. Like, what does she gain by lying? So here's super, super red flag number 76. Jesse tells Hazel, well, we have to convince Lee to go along with this plan. And I know how we're going to do that. Without warning her, punches Hazel in the face to give her a black eye, which when Hazel had shown off her black eye in Lee's point of view, I didn't mention that until now, but I really thought that was Benjamin, but Hazel does talk about how Benjamin would never hit her in the face. It usually was marks on the body. And Jesse does say, well, Lee doesn't know that. And it just, oh my God, like your partner should not be hitting you. So yeah, I was just thinking, Hazel, you gotta run. Like you have a type, and the type is really shitty, abusive men. And we need better for you. We really do. Like I was starting to feel for her because these guys suck. It's like her husband sucks. This new guy she meets sucks. But Jesse claimed that, well, we have to make it look like that Benjamin did that, and that's why he did it. But at this point, Hazel's like, yeah, this feels weird. Like, I think it's all starting to really catch up with her now that it's like, I'm pretty sure they're having sex because why would Lee lie to me? And my boyfriend just hit me in the, well, my affair boyfriend, trainer, whatever, just hit me in the face. So that just, I don't know, there's something off with that. So now instead of framing Lee, Hazel's starting to do a couple things to make it so that Lee doesn't get framed for the crime. Like she's kind of trying to be a friend. So for example, I think she ends up taking the statue back from Lee somehow. I can't remember exactly why, but like she doesn't want Lee to end up having the statue because she would have got framed with it. And there was another scene that we didn't really know what happened, where Jesse was like trying to find Lee's car keys or something, but Jesse had, like, we find out in Hazel's part that Jesse did have them, but had tossed them to Hazel to get Lee's knife out of the car, which I just realized I didn't mention. Like, way at the beginning, Lee had her knife because she got robbed on like chapter 1, so she like wanted to make sure she stayed protected, and she had this knife or whatever. And essentially, when they came up with the whole murder Benjamin thing, the new plan was going to be, when it came to framing Lee, was that Jesse was going to kill Benjamin and put it on Lee. And it would have been easy to do that because Lee would have been in the house and it would have been Lee's knife. So yeah, they were really setting this girl up, and I was getting pissed for Lee for sure. But Hazel's like, nah, I'm taking my own life in my own hands. And she ends up, instead of giving Jesse the knife or whatever, like, she ends up tossing it in the ocean so that Lee doesn't get caught. So I think what Hazel ends up thinking is that, well, I'm going to make sure that Jesse can't come in the house because the door is going to be locked. It was supposed to be unlocked or something. So I'm going to make sure he can't come in. And even if Lee goes there, like, she's not going to be in trouble because of all these, like, Hazel essentially assumed, I think I just saved everything, where like, I can maybe still escape, but like, no one's going to get framed for murder. Like, no one's going to be harmed. Benjamin will still be alive. But nope, when Hazel goes to the house, Benjamin is sitting there. Now, Hazel doesn't know that Jesse's dead because Lee had got there first and had still seen the body. And by the time Hazel gets there, Lee is gone and Jesse's body's gone. So now it's just Benjamin like, hey girl, like, I know you had a plan to kill me and it didn't work. So now we go back to Lee's point of view. And I'm going to kind of jump and just kind of state things really quickly that end up happening in this section, because this section and the last one, they go really quick. So Lee ends up at Jesse's apartment because she's trying to get answers on all of this. And she's starting to realize, oh shit, maybe Hazel and Jesse knew each other and I think they set me up. And she starts getting pissed off, which is very justifiable. But she also discovers that Jesse's real name is Carter Douglas Summer. When she finds this out, she discovers that Carter, who's Jesse, which I'll probably just keep saying Jesse so it's not too confusing, but him and his brother, they got in trouble for some like home invasion thing. So Lee ends up finding Jesse's brother, and this is where she finds out more details about that crime. And boy, did this shock me for sure. Like, they're talking about things, and the brother ended up going to jail, but Jesse didn't end up going to jail because he had a criminal defense lawyer known as Benjamin. So oh my God, just saying that, I just got a bunch of goosebumps because this is like another twist. I'm like, oh my God, all these people know each other. So that meant that Benjamin and Jesse knew each other the whole time as well. And I'm going to dig more into that. But I'm like, oh my God, all these people knew each other. It's just layers and layers of this onion. Lee ends up finding a flash drive, or well, she ends up finding this like pen and notebook at Jesse's house that she takes, but there's a flash drive in the pen, and that's where it's discovered. She hears these recordings that she's like, oh my God, but they don't tell us what's in the recordings yet. But essentially what's in them is that Benjamin hired Jesse to seduce his wife and murder her. And I remember I was just thinking like, oh my God, like, Jesse's a piece of shit. Like, Benjamin is kind of like that wolf that we knew was a piece of shit. And then Jesse's like that wolf in sheep's clothing, where it's like, he's just also a piece of shit. But I didn't, like I said, there was more red flag things in Hazel's section, but in Lee's section, I mean, this guy seems like a nice guy that just so happened to go to that place. And I should have known it was like too coincidental. And oh my God, these poor women. At a moment of weakness, Lee is just like, she's very emotional. And they mentioned towards the beginning of the story too, the only phone number that Lee can remember is her sister's, and she ends up calling her sister, and her dumbass sister. She might not be dumb, but she stands her ground on Clark. And like I said towards the beginning of the episode, that she's like, he has a sex problem, and Lee's just like, oh God, like, just go live your life, whatever, bitch. Well, then Benjamin ends up contacting Lee. He ends up calling her. I don't know how he figured out the number. He has all this power in the world, I guess, and money. So he ends up calling her and they end up meeting up, which, oh my God, I felt so tense about that because Benjamin, like all these people are just like interweaving in each other's lives. And I felt scared for Lee. I didn't know what was going to happen there, but oh my God, he's so manipulative as fuck because he's talking about like Hazel fucked both of us over and Jesse fucked both of us over. Like, we have a common enemy here and like we've both been wronged. And he ends up giving Lee this. Well, he first ends up mentioning that his security team ended up killing Jesse, which, man, like I felt like with Hazel or something that would have been cool. But I guess, they were trying to set up Hazel as some sort of protagonist along with Lee. But oh, like I'm like, oh, wah, 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 that it was like a no offense, but like his security team, it's not really like important characters in this story. But whatever, like that bitch deserved to die. That sounds so wrong, but they're fictional. They're fictional. I'm talking about fictional people here. I don't think anyone deserves to die necessarily, but that character sucked. I was happy. Like I was more happy. At first I was shocked. Like Lee was like, obviously Lee was really upset when she first found Jesse's body because she's like, oh my God, my boyfriend is dead, but why the hell is he dead in my friend's house? What a story, talk about with the kids. But but I'm happy Jesse's dead. When during this exchange, Benjamin offers Lee an opportunity to like live in Texas, and she could be a sous chef at some restaurant that one of Benjamin's friends. It's just more like control power type of thing. But what Lee realizes, because Benjamin thinks he's like really outsmarted his wife and he knows everything, but he does not realize that Hazel had this plan of escape and like had an escape for Lee as well. So Lee has a couple options. She could go along with this whole Panama thing that her and Hazel had planned. Lee thought like Hazel had fucked her out of that plan at first, but it turns out like the money really was there and Hazel had apologized through some note. But Lee, has to make a choice if she's going to do the Panama way of escape or if she's going to do the Texas thing. Like she has some options now. But I'm going to spoil it here. They don't say what ends up happening, but there's two things that happen during this chapter, but we find out in Hazel's section what happens, that Lee does end up escaping. Lee does end up going with Hazel's original plan and she goes to Panama. And something that I caught on before they even revealed it was those recordings Lee anonymously delivers to the cops, which that I knew before that was even told. Like I had a feeling she did that, which I was also a little surprised because obviously she felt wronged by Hazel. I don't know how realistic it was that Lee would still want to help Hazel, but maybe it's also because she noticed, like, for example, she was like, like I felt like I was being framed, but then I kind of wasn't being framed. And she realized, I think she was starting to think to herself, maybe Hazel was like, maybe Jesse wanted to frame me for this murder, but Hazel was kind of not wanting to frame me for this murder. So I think she was feeling a little conflicted, but then decided, like she's growing as a character throughout this book. So I think Lee was like, you know what, I'm going to try to do the right thing and actually tell the people this time, which I just realized that was definitely a growth moment because she didn't tell her sister about the affair thing. And then I think this time maybe she's like, no, I'm going to actually tell the right people this time. And that ends Lee's section. So then we have one more section from Hazel. So now in Hazel's section, Benjamin reveals his involvement with Jesse, which essentially we got from Lee's chapter. We ended up finding out he slaps Hazel, sends her to the room. And at this point, I think Hazel is just done. She's like, fuck this. Like, I'm tired of living this way and I need to take control of my life because it's ridiculous. I thought this was going to be part of the plan, but I guess it wasn't. But she just, at this point, she wants to see her mom. Her mom does have Alzheimer's, but she's like, can I please go see her? And Benjamin's against at first, but then the security detail convinces Benjamin, just let her do it. And I thought Hazel was going to try to escape. She doesn't, which I thought was a little weird. I know if it was me, I would have got the fuck out of Dodge with that. But, she wants to see her mom to say goodbye. And they kind of have a little bit of a touching moment. Then Hazel goes back to the house. She takes a bath. And she's like, you know what? The only way I can escape this is if I take my own life and that I really do it. And she starts recording a video. But then as she's filming her like suicide video, the cops come in and they arrest Benjamin for conspiracy to murder. And Hazel's like conspiracy to murder of who? And the cops are like, he was going to murder you. And that's when Hazel finds out that whole part of the plan. Benjamin had only talked about, like, oh, you fell in love with Jesse and you're an idiot for that because I hired him to like seduce you. He didn't mention the whole part about murdering her in that part. But now Hazel knows, like, oh my God, like they were trying to kill me. So then we have Detective French, not a super important character, but that's the cop on the case. And they bring Hazel in for questioning. Now Hazel lies to the police. Like, why? How dumb can you be with that? And I guess I kind of understand Hazel lied because she didn't want to bring Lee into all of this. She's like trying to keep Lee out of this and just wants Lee to live a happy life, even if Hazel doesn't get to. But I mean, come on. Like, of course, the police catch her in the lies. It's you have a defense lawyer as a partner. Like, why would you ever think that lying to police was a good idea? And on top of it, I just feel like if you have nothing to lose, like, what's the point? Like, why not just tell the truth? Like, even if you're trying to be loyal to Lee, I don't know. If I was in this position, I think I would just be like, screw it. Like, I'm gonna just give what I can give here because I have nothing to lose. And it's like, fuck it. Like, I just feel like being honest with the police, like they're gonna obviously trust you and like work with you, I feel, in a way. But nope, that's not what she does. So they catch her in lies and she does not look good because of that. Now Vanessa is one of those friends that Hazel was with, but she ends up not being a fake friend, which was a little surprising to me. She gives Hazel all this really useful information about getting out of the marriage and stuff. I guess things that Vanessa did in her previous marriage. So I'm like, okay, Vanessa actually seems like a good friend. But the important takeaway from all this exchange is that Hazel finds out Benjamin had a first wife. Hazel thought she was the only one that was ever married to Benjamin. He never mentioned being married to someone before. Her name ends up being Carolina. Not super important. We're going to get to that in a second. Or the reason that it's not super important is Hazel is excited at first because she's like, oh, this is another woman that understands what I've been through. And she ended up escaping. But then we find out that she's dead and that she was in a car accident, which that just seems like that seems to be a coincidence. The type of man that Benjamin is, I don't think they ever admit that Benjamin was behind that car accident. But I mean, come on, like I could see it. Like, I guess this first wife was telling everyone that he just was awful and stuff, and he wasn't going to have his reputation destroyed. So I think he took her out. She went back to like Poland or something, and he's like, I don't care, like she's dying for that, like you're not going to talk shit about me. So then after that, Hazel's like, oh, that sucks. But then what really sucks is Hazel's mom ends up going missing. And she obviously thinks that Benjamin has something to do with that he kidnapped her. Now, in the book, it does say that Hazel's mom ended up going to some place that was familiar to her in the past, like in the woods. It's very hard for me to believe that's what happened. I really do think Benjamin had something to do with it. He claims he didn't, but he's like also a fucking liar. So I don't know. The book did mention that, like, no, she got there herself and like died in this memory or something. She does end up finding her mom dead in the woods, and I it's just hard for me to believe. I think the narrative is that she did get there herself, but the possibility of her actually escaping on her own with Alzheimer's, like, where the hell was this useless ass staff? Like, how did they let someone escape out of this place? Like, I could definitely believe more that Benjamin, like, with his power and resources, got her out and just fucking slain her out there. Like, I don't know. To me, that's just more believable. Maybe that's not what actually happened, but I don't know. Now, when Hazel goes back to the police station, she ends up hearing those voice recordings that Lee had submitted. Now, we don't know that Lee had submitted them because it's still saying that the cops are saying it was anonymous, but that's how they found out that Benjamin and Jesse were working together to kill her, the whole conspiracy to murder thing. That's how he got caught. And of course, Hazel's horrified by hearing this. And then the whole time, the police keep claiming that, yeah, Benjamin he's not getting bail. He's going to stay arraigned. And then, of course, he doesn't. Like, I knew that was happening. I knew he was going to get out of jail. That's exactly what happens. Hazel's like, okay, I'm packing a bag. I'm getting out of here. And then, of course, she ends up going to some motel And then, of course, Benjamin ends up finding Hazel at said motel. They argue. It's like causing a scene. Someone notices. They're like, hey, are you all right? And Hazel just gets the hell out of there. Benjamin's trying to hold onto that door. And Hazel's like, fuck off. She ends up driving off. And then as Hazel's driving off, the police are calling her once again. Oh my God, poor Hazel, honestly, in this situation, because they just keep calling her with new information. It's just a lot of back and forth of like, we caught Benjamin in this, so he's arraigned, and oh no, Benjamin's out of jail, and then Benjamin, we have him arrested again. And the police are saying like, oh, you should come back again for more questioning. And to be honest, I think I'd feel the same way as Hazel did and have this fuck it moment where Hazel's just like, no, I'm not doing this. Like, I'm this man will never stop. He won't stop. He's too rich. He's too powerful. Like, I just have to get out of here at this point because I can't kill him. Like, I'll go to jail, essentially. So she just says, fuck it. She hangs up. She's like, I'm running to Panama. Now, people definitely had a problem with this whole thing. When I said that Lee had ran off to Panama, essentially what the plan between Lee and Hazel was that Lee had made a fake ID for herself, and then she made one for Lee as well, but Lee wasn't supposed to go to Panama, I guess. But then when Hazel was feeling bad about framing Lee, I hope this isn't too confusing, by the way, because it's a little convoluted, but Hazel had given Lee her fake ID, or like her whole plan, and that Hazel was just going to suffer the consequences. So then what I saw a lot of readers had a problem with was Hazel goes to that beach and she digs up like a second fake ID. And I remember readers were saying, oh my God, like that's so ridiculous that she like had this second fake ID the whole time and had this whole second separate plan from Panama. And that's like supposedly a twist on how Hazel also ends up going to Panama along with Lee, and they both just happen to have like all this free money on the side. But I didn't have too much of a problem with that. I think at this point I was just happy that Hazel was getting the hell out of the situation. Well, we end up fast forwarding to the epilogue, the very end of the story, where Lee has a restaurant in Panama. It's like this like restaurant shack kind of thing, but it's doing well. Hazel ends up finding Lee. Now they're both different names. I think Lee's name, oh man, I can't remember. I think it's Kelly. And then I think Hazel's new name is Nora or something, but they both have new names, obviously, because fake IDs. It's awkward at first between them, which understandably so. This has been a few months later where they finally run into each other. And yeah, if I was Lee, I don't know how forgiving I would have been. I don't know. But it is awkward at first, and they talk a little bit about it. And, Hazel once again apologizes about everything, but she explains that she was also trying to help her too later on, that like she felt bad and, kind of is able to tell her side of the story. So then Lee's like, okay, like, I guess she did have my back at the end of the day. Like, maybe she was a little bitch at first. She doesn't think that, but like she was going along something so awful at the beginning, but then ended up kind of making up for it, because I wouldn't end up having this lifestyle if it wasn't for her, because she, would have been framed for the murder. And then the story ends where Hazel starts working at the restaurant with Lee. So that is all of the spoilers. That's everything that ends up happening in this book. I loved this book. So this is similar to Lisa's Jewel's book, None of This Is True. That book I'd finished in a few days. Drowning Woman also finished in like 3 days. So when I finish a book in like a few days, I'm typically not the fastest reader. That definitely means I thoroughly enjoyed it. And for this book, I don't even feel like I need to explain too much, but I gave it 5 stars easily. One of the best things was that I felt like the characters were very realistic. They're very vulnerable. You're rooting for them, but they also have like these twisted backgrounds. But it felt very raw, it felt very real. I felt like Robyn did great research on her characters and on her story. I think some criticisms was all of the twists and all of the coincidences, but I didn't get that impression personally. I thought that the twists were great in the book. I was thoroughly engaged and enjoying the information. I felt like I was on this crazy adventure ride. And actually, The Drowning Woman is probably my new favorite novel by her. I am definitely reading more of her stuff. I own The Arraignment and I think the other one's called Her Pretty Face. Those are two other books by Robyn Harding that I most likely will also be covering on the podcast eventually. I'm just trying to review different authors, but it's really hard not to just read her books and do all episodes on Robyn Harding. I'd probably have a whole season worth of her books. And unfortunately, since I read the other two, they most likely won't be on the show. Who knows? Maybe I'll revisit past books that I read, but those were also two 5-star reads as well. So anything that Robyn Harding reads, if you're a thriller fan or if you like that domestic type of stuff, like domestic thrillers, I highly recommend Robyn Harding to read as an author. The writing style I thought was easy to read. It flowed together well. The finished product, I mean, the cover of the book is just great. I loved the little blurb in it. There was one very tiny editing thing that I actually caught, but I don't take any points off for that at all. But there was a part where it said it was one of the scenes where it said that Jesse was talking to Hazel, but it was supposed to be Lee. It was just a name typo type of thing. It was definitely supposed to be Lee because with Hazel's name there, it didn't make sense. So that was the only little like really I'm a freelance editor, so I notice those like really tiny details sometimes. But besides that, like that book was just perfect. So yeah, this is a book that I definitely recommend to, like I said, anyone that is a thriller fan. Now, any opinions that I have on books, it doesn't mean you're going to have the same one, whether I like the book or don't like the book. So far, most of the books that I've read for this show, I have been like 5-star. I really liked them. Well, that's going to be it for this episode. I hope you guys enjoyed. Make sure, if you're not already, to subscribe to the show on Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you're listening to. If you can share the episode, that's great. Definitely share it with your book friends and let me know what you think of the episodes. I hope all of you guys have a super special, awesome day. Happy reading, and bye.